These are the 5 main pain points of Israel since October 7th. Okay? These are the main problems that Israel has had to deal with in this war, and in their attempts to completely wipe out Palestinians in Gaza, because they want to annex Gaza, and eventually they want to annex the West Bank, what they call Judea and Samaria, basically laying claim to the West Bank as well. These are the 5 obstacles that they've had: hostages, social media, the UN and the ICC and ICJ, campus protests, and Iran and its allies or proxies, and the Gulf countries that are also in limbo because they can't really come out and fully normalize with Israel and give Israel what it wants. One, because of popular opposition to Israel in those countries, and also because of the threat of Iran. Iran is threatening to actually strike oil refineries and the petroleum infrastructure within the Gulf. And this is going to be a catastrophic economic blow to the Gulf. And this is what the US absolutely does not want. The global economy absolutely does not want that. So these are the biggest weaknesses. And you could put number 6, you can put the Houthis as well. The Houthis and Yemen and what they're doing to in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. You can put that as number 6 because it's negatively impacted the economy within Israel. So what is Trump doing for all 5 of these? 6 if you include the Yemen issue. The ceasefire solves the hostage issue. Why? Because the Hamas is agreeing to release the hostages in a step-by-step, multi-phased agreement. They're going to be releasing the hostages. So immediately, that is going to ease a lot of pressure off of Netanyahu when those hostages are released. Why? Because the hostages are the main source of instability for Netanyahu in his coalition government. All of the protests that have been happening in Tel Aviv, all of the protests, the mass protests where hundreds of thousands of Israelis are going on the streets and demanding that Netanyahu be deposed and put in prison, all of those protests are not because they care about Palestinian human rights or, oh, you're committing a genocide. That's not what the protests in Israel are about. The protests in Israel are, hey, these Israelis are being killed. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. You have to make a deal to get our people back, our hostages back. They're pressuring Netanyahu, and this is mostly coming from the left and the center, or even the center right within Israeli society. But Netanyahu's coalition government depends on the far right, on Israeli politicians like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the economic minister, and the right-wing party, the far-right party, and the religious element within Israeli society. So Netanyahu's stuck in the middle. He has to balance these two pressures that he's under. And the hostage situation, the fact that the hostages are over there, that is a huge source of instability. The right wing, the religious right wing, they don't care about the hostages. These hostages, they're mostly just liberal Jews. Let them be killed. So what? That's a small price to pay for the third temple. That's a small price to pay for the Messiah. Small price to pay. Who cares? Okay, just wipe it all out. Just if they could, they would just nuke Gaza. They would just nuke it. So who cares? 200 hostages. You gotta break a few eggs to make the Messiah omelet. So that's the far right, and Netanyahu is only able to be in this position as prime minister of Israel because of this coalition with the far right. So he can't lose that. But, you have all of these protests happening from the rest of Israeli society that we want to bring them home, make a deal. We have to prioritize their lives. So that's Netanyahu stuck between a rock and a hard place. Now, if the hostages are returned, okay, problem solved. Problem solved. Then all of Israeli society can be united on exterminating the Palestinians and taking over Gaza and then eventually taking over the West Bank. That's what he wants. That's what he wants. But he has to save face. He has to save face. So it's ideal, actually, to make it seem like Trump has forced his hand. Oh, it's Trump. Trump is forcing me. Trump is forcing me to release these hostages and to agree to a ceasefire. And then you have to make this big song and dance that, oh, this is because Trump is forcing us. In reality, this is great for Netanyahu. And what is going to stop him once the hostages are released to immediately go back to bombing Gaza, immediately going back to carpet bombing Gaza, and just forcing the Palestinians into the Sinai. What's stopping him from doing that? Presumably, like a normal people wouldn't want the bad optics that you're violating a ceasefire. You agreed to a ceasefire, and then as soon as you got what you wanted, then you resume the bombing. You break the ceasefire. Normal people, their reputation would be destroyed. They would suffer all kinds of consequences, legally, economically, socially, in terms of global perception of your country. But you think Israel cares about that? You think Israel cares about their perception? You think Netanyahu cares? No, they don't care. They've proved that. They've proved that over the past year and 3 months. So there seems to be very little preventing Netanyahu, as soon as the hostages are released, to resume bombing. That's obstacle number one, gonna be quickly eliminated. Okay, what about obstacle number two? Social media. That's been a big problem, but is it a problem because of which social media platform? Mainly TikTok, right? Mainly TikTok has been the problem. That's the one platform that hasn't been brought to heel by these different Israeli Zionist groups like the ADL. So, look at this. We've banned TikTok, but Trump has come in and saved the day and restored TikTok. Restored TikTok after just less than 24 hours or maybe 24 hours of being banned. It's back. So now all of the people who were on TikTok, about 170 million Americans on TikTok, are relieved. Now TikTok is back. But guess what? You can't post Free Palestine. You can't post Free Palestine on TikTok anymore. Your comment gets automatically deleted. It's against terms of service. This is hate speech if you say Free Palestine. TikTok, one of the main sources of red pilling Americans on Israel, now it's under the boot. Now it's under control. X obviously has been. Elon went and took that little trip to different World War II historical sites. He went and met with Netanyahu. So X has been taken care of. X has been taken care of. And then you have Facebook, Instagram, meeting with Mark Zuckerberg is going and saying, oh, yeah, I love Trump. Trump is just, I was so wrong about Trump. I'm realizing Trump is actually a great guy. Trump is amazing. And I was completely mistaken. He goes on Joe Rogan's podcast and he starts glazing Trump. So these are all the social media platforms coming behind Trump, and therefore coming under the boot of Zionist policies. If you post Free Palestine, that's hate speech. If you criticize Israel, that's hate speech. If you advocate for Palestinians, that's hate speech. You want to share videos about what Israel is doing? That's hate speech. That's all of that is hate speech. So social media, number 2, cross that out. That huge obstacle, that's going to not be a factor in at least while Trump is president. The UN, ICC. What does Trump do? Introduce sanctions. Sanctioning the ICC. So let's here's the TikTok is back, but with a twist. Trump revokes Biden's order that ended the 2020 sanctions targeting the ICC. So Trump had already put sanctions on the ICC in his first term. Why? Because the ICC was looking at American actions and what American troops had done in Afghanistan, Iraq. So Trump didn't want any investigation. He didn't want any scrutiny of what the atrocities that America has committed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other parts of the Middle East. So he sanctions the ICC. Biden comes into office in 2021, and he lifts those sanctions. Trump comes into office 2025. He reinstates those sanctions. And now he has even much more reason to do so, because it's not only U.S. that's under scrutiny. Now the scrutiny is all on Israel. Okay, no more ICC. No more International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court. So that solves that problem. Also, in one move, Trump eliminated U.S. funding for the UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians and the U.S. role as Mideast peacemaker. Gone. Funding to UNRWA, gone. Which is what the Zionists have been begging for. They claim that UNRWA is a terrorist organization. They're providing aid to Hamas, therefore they're a terrorist organization. UNRWA has to go. No more relief for Palestinians. Trump comes into office, immediately is trying to take it out. His administration would no longer fund UNRWA. America has further written itself out of the process of peacemaking in the Middle East. So there goes that. Okay, there goes the UN and ICC. Campus protests. Immediately, Trump takes office, and there's already moves on this. There's already moves. What is it? So there was a lawsuit against Harvard University claiming that Harvard University's policies are anti-Semitic. Harvard University did not do enough to clamp down on all of these Hamas on campus protesting Israel. Harvard is just a bunch of anti-Semites. So this is the main Jewish Zionists with the lawsuit. A year ago, I decided to sue Harvard over their blatant civil rights violations and normalization of anti-Semitism on campus. Although certain Jewish nonprofits discouraged us, we charted a new path forward for young American Jewry, and I'm delighted that there are now more than a dozen such cases filed by heroic Jewish students across the country. I'm deeply grateful for the 4 other plaintiffs at Harvard who decided to join me. Although I wish they weren't anonymous, their bravery is commendable. Harvard, rather than apologize or recognize anti-Semitism on our campus, filed 2 separate motions to dismiss our case with prejudice. They lost. We are the first case of its kind to go to trial. I'm happy that many of my demands, like the implementation of the IHRA definition in partnership with an Israeli university, were met during the settlement negotiations. It's pathetic, however, that Harvard needed a lawsuit for this to happen. That being said, our country is suffering from a crisis of accountability. The only way to defeat lawlessness is through punishment and discipline. Harvard must never even think about treating another student like the way they treated me. How did they treat this student? They allowed people to protest against Israeli genocide. As such, we will depose Claudine Gay, Alan Garber, Marla Frederick, Penny Pritzker, and DEI admin under oath so they can explain to a jury why they allowed anti-Semitism to fester on campus and why they ignored my cries for help. I look forward to discovery where we will uncover through emails, texts, meetings, and private correspondence just how much Qatar is funding Harvard, why anti-Semitic professors are promoted, and why students who harass Jews are never disciplined. Never. Lastly, we'll be working closely with the Trump administration to ensure Harvard's endowment is taxed, its funds are withheld, and its faculty are properly disciplined. Harvard created this settlement to look like a PR win so they can go to the Trump admin and say they fixed the problem. Nothing can be further from the truth. In fact, we'll be working with Trump's DOJ, Education Department, Office of Civil Rights on this lawsuit to hold Harvard accountable. The fight has just begun. Stay tuned. One day, and this is the Harvard newspaper, one day after Trump takes office, Harvard settles two anti-Semitism lawsuits. So Harvard just wanted to go to trial, but once Trump took office, what's the point? Essentially, what's the point? So just look at this. Like, this is all, like, the anti-Semitism that he's complaining about is that there is protests for Palestine on campus. So they want to shut down all of these protests. And yeah, they're winning on this. They want to basically take from Harvard's endowment, this, I don't know what the endowment is up to, like $50 billion endowment of Harvard, and just transfer as much as possible to Israel and Zionists. Because there's just so much anti-Semitism. If you say free Palestine, that means you're an anti-Semite. And then here is, so, Harvard Crimson, Shabbos Kestenbaum, the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit, refused to join the settlement agreement and will pursue additional litigation under a new counsel. Kestenbaum, who recently graduated from Harvard Div School, has been a vocal public critic of Harvard and spoke against the university at the Republican National Convention in July. Yeah, so it seems these people, like Trump is going to side with Harvard? No, he's going to side with Shabbos Kestenbaum. And he's inviting Shabbos to come and speak at Republican national conventions. Okay, so, and then what is this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? It's the most expansive definition of anti-Semitism, if you don't know. Things like, if you draw a comparison between contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis, that's anti-Semitism. If you say that, well, the Nazis committed a genocide against Jews, and this is what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, that's an anti-Semitic statement. You can't say that. Claims that Jews killed Jesus. So this is something in the New Testament. It's like literally in the Bible. This is anti-Semitism. You can't, the Bible is anti-Semitic, obviously. Claiming that Jewish citizens are loyal to Israel or have priorities for Israel than the interests of their own nations. Even they say this themselves. They say this themselves, but if you say it or I say it, that's anti-Semitism. Anyway, so yeah, this is the most expansive definition of anti-Semitism. This is going to be adopted. They tried to make it law. They tried to make it, it is part of the law. Because they're forcing universities, because of legislation that Congress passed, they're forcing universities to uphold this standard of anti-Semitism. And if they don't, then they'll lose federal funding. And Trump is only going to further entrench this. Yeah, so going down the list. Hostages, social media, UN, campus protests, clamped down, okay, completely crippled. And then Iran and Gulf allies. So we already know that Trump has immediately lifted any restrictions, because there was a Biden restriction on 2,000-pound bombs going to Israel, going to the IDF. What does Trump do? He lifts all military restrictions on Israel on the first day of office, in office. They need more bombs. And the IDF has admitted that there were certain periods of time in this war that they didn't have weapons. They didn't have the munitions to drop bombs. So they would just fly their planes over Gaza and fly the drones just to terrorize the population without actually having any bombs, because they're waiting for the next shipment from the United States. Trump is saying, no, all restrictions lifted. Give them more bombs. By the way, if there's a ceasefire, why does Israel need bombs so immediately? Why is it so urgent for Trump to lift all restrictions if there's a ceasefire? Why is he rushing to lift the restrictions, not on all, because obviously the U.S. has been constantly sending bombs, but specifically these 2,000-pound bombs? Why does Trump on the first day of office have to rush to make sure they're getting 2,000-pound bombs if there's a ceasefire? Isn't there a ceasefire with Lebanon? Isn't there a ceasefire with Hamas? Why has U.S. President Trump removed sanctions on Israeli settlers? The Israeli far right has celebrated Trump lifting sanctions imposed on some settlers by his predecessor, Joe Biden. So, oh yeah, this is so much in line with peace in the Middle East. Like, this is why Trump is... it's like Trump is the hostage. Trump is being held hostage. Like, the most charitable interpretation of Trump is that Trump does want peace. Trump does want, to de-escalate around the world and bring the U.S. troops home and bring U.S. involvement in the Middle East to a close. In his heart of hearts, he knows that that's the right thing. But he can only make lip service. Meanwhile, what his administration is lifting sanctions on settlers, terrorizing Palestinians. Since October 7th, 800, and this is according to official reports, 800, probably many more, Palestinians in the West Bank have been killed, have been murdered. 800. And now, any kind of sanction that was remaining, Trump is removing it. Why? Because he wants to help Netanyahu out and bring Judea and Samaria. And arguably his biggest donor, Miriam Adelson, $100 million donation to Donald Trump's presidential campaign. What's her number one priority? Annexing the West Bank. Annexing the West Bank. So Trump, from day one, he's making good on his promises. So Iran and the Gulf allies. Iran has been to a large degree neutered. And this is already such a huge advantage to Israel. Syria, the new Syrian government says, no more weapons going to Lebanon. Iran cannot transfer weapons across our territory. Okay, so what does that mean? Hezbollah is not going to be able to arm themselves against Israeli invasion. And even though the ceasefire, the condition of the ceasefire that Israel has with Lebanon is that Israel has to leave the southern border. They have to leave the southern border in the next 72 hours. You think they're going to do that? Why would they? Why would they? They're just buying enough time so that they can relaunch. Basically, the whole operation, Netanyahu basically bit off more than he could chew. He underestimated the capacity of Hamas. He underestimated the capacity of Hezbollah. He underestimated the capacity of Iran, their capabilities. He definitely underestimated the capacity of the Houthis. He bit off, and he didn't anticipate a huge wave of social media criticism, campus protests. He didn't expect the UN to come down and issue arrest warrants for him and his administration. He didn't anticipate this. Okay, so lesson learned. Now we'll one by one take care of all of these problems. We'll isolate Iran as much as possible, and then we'll continue. The plan will continue. The train will move on. The caravan will move on. That's the plan. So while we celebrate ceasefire and the rest that the Palestinians receive in this limited ceasefire, we should still be realistic. We should be realistic about what's happening, what is going to happen. It's really stupid for Muslims to be blind to these moves that are being made against us constantly. And sometimes we're more optimistic, sometimes we're more pessimistic, but we should always be realistic. And I see the tendency from a lot of Muslims where they just want to hear good news constantly. They want to hear good news constantly. They want to celebrate constantly. And okay, that's fine. Like that's good for like someone who has a childlike mindset. But people who are in charge have to be much more sober. People who are given the responsibility to think about these issues, to speak about these issues, to lead the Muslims around the world, we have to be much more sober and realistic. Because if you're not realistic, then how can you make the right decisions? You're making decisions based on delusions, based on imagination, based on false optimism. And this was the situation with Syria. Yeah, we're happy. Look at what they did or what people said when I said, yeah, we're happy that Bashar has been deposed, and I wish that he was actually caught so that he could be tried for his crimes. We're happy about that. But let's be realistic about what this means for Palestine, what it means for the future of the Middle East, what it means for the entire Ummah. Let's be more realistic about that. And that realism, I was smeared as being an Assadist. I was smeared as being a kafir. I was being takfired, actually. I was being takfired by all of these sectarians and all of these, I mean, they're idiots, right? How is realism so bad? Like, why are you so allergic? Why are you so angry when someone says that, yeah, okay, this is good, but it's qualified? This is, okay, something is positive, but there's also a negative side to it. Can we look at the negative side and talk about it? No. No negativity allowed. If you have any negativity, that means you hate the Muslims and you're a kafir. SubhanAllah, I'm not exaggerating. Look at my Twitter. So this is a very bad mindset, a very destructive mindset, and I've talked about it on different streams as well. You point out that, hey guys, I know you love these imams, these compassionate imams. I know you love them. I know you listen to them and they make you feel so good, and you get that iman rush and that iman boost. Oh, I just love Imam so-and-so and Mufti so-and-so. Oh, I just feel so good when I listen to his lectures. And then someone comes along and says, hey, but are you reading between the lines, or are you like listening to exactly what he's saying and what he's pushing the community towards? Are you listening to that? That's fine. Yeah, he said some nice stuff. He said some good stuff. Great. But are you also looking at the negative? This is not just a tiny little thing. This is not like some ikhtilaf that's acceptable. Like, this is reform of the religion. This is opening the religion up to liberalization and feminism and all of these destructive things that are literally destroying Muslim families, Muslim societies, and on and on. Are you aware of that? Oh, Daniel, you hate the ulama. Daniel, you are a deviant that hates the ulama. All you do is criticize. So this is just a recurring pattern. And I mean, they can cry and whine as much as they want, but it's not gonna deter me from speaking what I think is right. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. So this is the game plan. Israel. So this is the framework. If you understand this framework, also number 6, the Houthis. Trump, again, first day in office, says that the Houthis designates them as a terrorist organization. So he even takes action on number 6. So all of these points, and that's going to have economic impact, even more economic impact on Yemen. That's why that's a problem to designate them as a terrorist organization. So yeah, Trump is doing the bidding of Israel from day one. And the Zionists are loving it. The Zionists are loving it. President Trump lied to me. He said I would tire of the winning. I'm not tired of the winning. I demand more winning. So Ben Shapiro, arch-Zionist, celebrating. He's just winning. Shapiro's just winning. Remember last week people were saying, "Oh yeah, Israel understands this as a loss. The ceasefire. They're really broken up about this ceasefire. It's a real loss for them." But yeah, why are all these Zionists celebrating? Why are they all celebrating now, just a week later? And yeah, I don't want to say that Israel has defeated the Palestinians. I'm not saying that Israel has won. That's not what I'm saying. But the steps that they're taking are strategically leading to an ultimate result. That's very bad. These are steps that they're taking methodically, strategically, and we have to be aware of that. That's what it means to be realistic and not to be blinded by optimism, misplaced optimism.